Cold stone holds the night's chill in the narrow stairwell of the town hall, and your breath comes out thin and pale. Somewhere above you, muffled behind a wooden door, a clock ticks with steady patience. You lift your lantern a little, and the light finds worn steps, a handrail polished by years of early mornings. It is late autumn in 1926, and the square outside is still mostly dark with only a faint seam of grey at the horizon. At the top landing you pause, the way you always do, listening before you touch anything. Your fingers find the ledger, and you read the last winding date by the small circle of lamplight. You rest your palm against the case to feel the temperature, then lean in to hear the beat more clearly. The tick is almost even, but not quite. And you notice it the way you notice a shoelace that has begun to loosen. So you set your tools down carefully and begin the day the quiet way a town keeps time, one careful turn at a time. You take out your key, the long one with the squared end worn slightly round from years of service. You fit it to the winding arbor, and you don't turn yet, not until you've listened again, close enough to smell old oil and varnished wood. The sound has a faint hitch in it, like a walker with a stiff knee. Steady, steady. Then a small hesitation you can't unhear. You check the hands through the dial window, and your eyes go first to the minute hand, then to the small mark you scratched months ago. It's behind. Not much, just enough to make you frown in the lantern light, because you know what it should be at this moment. Across the square, the post office keeps a regulator clock in a glass case, set by the daily signal, and you've learned to trust it. Yesterday you were careful, and the ledger says so, a neat entry in your own hand. But the town hall is drifting, and drift has a way of spreading if you don't find where it begins. You make your first decision of the morning without speaking it out loud. You'll wind it as usual, because low weight makes clocks behave badly, and you won't blame a machine until you've fed it properly. But after the weights are up, you'll stay, you'll listen longer, and you'll check the going train and the pendulum beat with more patience than the schedule likes. You begin to wind. The key turns with that familiar resistance, a slow, steady pull that asks for your shoulder more than your wrist. The cable takes up, the drum turns, and somewhere inside the case you can feel, more than hear, the weight rising through its narrow shaft. You pause every few turns, not because you're tired, but because you're respectful. A crossed line on the barrel can chew itself into trouble, and trouble, here, falls downward. When the weight is high enough, the resistance changes, and you stop before it goes hard. You set the key down on your rag, and you listen again. The tick is still there, still patient, but now, with the train properly powered, the hitch stands out more clearly. It isn't the big, lazy slowing of a clock running down. It's a small unevenness, a slight lopsidedness to the beat, like the pendulum is being nudged. I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request. Stand there with your hand resting on the wood, and you let your ear do its slow work. You tilt your head just a little, and you listen for the space between tick and tock. You're listening for the beat, not the volume. A healthy clock and good beat has a kind of even walking pace to it, as if it's crossing a flat floor. This one sounds like the floor has a small rise on one side. You don't rush to correct it. You look first because looking is quiet, and it costs nothing. You lift the lantern and bring the light close to the back door of the case. The glass is cool and a little fogged where your breath has touched it. Inside, the brass has that soft, older glow, not bright, but well used. The pendulum rod hangs straight, and the bob looks steady, swinging with a calm authority. But your ear keeps returning to that unevenness. You take out your pocket watch, the one you keep for work, and you hold it near the door seam. You don't open the case yet. You just compare sounds. Watch against tower, one heartbeat against another. They nearly agree, but the tower is the one with the limp. You make a note in the margin of the ledger with your pencil. You write, tick uneven, minute hand slow, inspect after route. Your handwriting is small in the lantern light. You close the ledger because the next part of the day is movement. You gather your key, your rag, your little oil bottle, and the thin screwdriver. You tuck them into the pockets you've worn into the shape of tools. Then you step back into the stairwell and pull the door until it catches with its soft wooden click. The sound of the clock fades behind it, but it doesn't disappear. It follows you down the steps like a thought you're carrying. Outside, the square is still dim. The cobbles hold cold, and they shine faintly where yesterday's damp hasn't yet dried. A delivery cart stands along the curb like a sleeping animal. In the distance, you hear the first metal clink of someone opening a shutter. You turn your collar up, not from drama, just from habit. And you start walking toward the station, because the station is where a town's time gets judged. The railway keeps its own discipline. Even in a small coastal place, railway time is not a suggestion. The station sits a little lower than the square. It smells different before dawn, coal smoke that's old and settled, wet wood, iron, and a faint sourness from yesterday's tea. The platform lamps are still on. They make warm pools of light on the boards, and the air between the pools looks darker by comparison. The station clock is mounted high where everyone can see it. A big face, bold numbers, hands thick enough to read from the far end of the platform. It's a public promise. You nod to the porter, who's sweeping without hurrying. Your boots make a small, hollow sound on the boards. You're not trying to be quiet, but you don't want to wake the place either. The station master sees you coming and raises a hand in that plain way people do when they recognize a routine. He doesn't smile much. He doesn't have to. His job is to keep trains in order, and order has its own expression. He meets you by the office door, the one with frosted glass and a strip of paint worn by years of shoulders brushing past. He says it without preamble. Passengers complained yesterday. He says the platform clock was 2 minutes fast compared to the guard's watch. He says it in the same tone he might use for a missing parcel or a stiff lock. Just facts. You take that in and you let it sit. A clock fast is easier to forgive than a clock slow. Fast makes people early. Slow makes them miss things. But a fast clock also tells you something else. It tells you that the chain of trust in the town's time is not as neat as it should be. You ask, calmly, what the guard set his watch by. The station master says, railway time. He says it like it's one word. He tells you the signal comes through, and the watches are set, and that's that. You nod, because you know the system. The railways have been pressing towns into shared minutes for decades now. Before, church clocks could argue with each other across a valley. Now a train doesn't care about valleys. It cares about the timetable. You take out your pocket watch again. You flip it open with your thumbnail. The face is small, the hands thin, and the second hand moves with a fine, nervous energy. You hold it near your lantern light to see clearly. Then you ask to see the station's reference. The station master leads you into his office. Inside, it's warmer, not warm like a sitting room, just warmed by bodies, paper, and a small stove that's been fed. There's a smell of ink and tobacco and damp wool. On the wall is a smaller clock, not for passengers, for staff. This one is kept closer, watched more closely. It's set by the railway's authority, and it's checked like a tool. You stand between the wall clock and your watch. You don't talk, you compare. You wait for the second hand to come to the top. You watch it pass. You note the difference. Your pocket watch is not quite where it should be. Not wildly wrong, but wrong enough to stop you trusting it as a judge. You feel a mild disappointment, the way you do when a familiar tool isn't behaving. A watch can be jarred, a watch can be magnetized by accident, or gummed by old oil, or simply drift with temperature. And you've been working in cold stairwells and damp towers. You close your watch and put it away, because today it's not the authority. Today the railway is. You step back out onto the platform. The air feels colder after the office. You look up at the big clock face again. 2 minutes fast is 2 minutes too much. You ask for access to the clock mechanism. The station master produces the key from a ring that looks heavy enough to be a weapon. He hands it over without ceremony. You climb the narrow stairs to the clock alcove. It's a tighter, dustier space than the town hall. The station clock was installed with practicality in mind, not comfort. The boards creak under your weight. Your lantern makes the shadows jump, but nothing in here moves except the clock. The mechanism sits behind the dial, iron and brass and steel. It's a little grimier than the municipal one. Coal dust finds its way into everything near a railway. You place your rag down on a beam, making a clean place in a dirty room. Then you take out the winding crank for this clock. It's different from the town hall key. The square is a different size, the handle worn in a different pattern. You fit it to the arbor. Before you wind, you check the weights. You look at the lines the way they sit on the barrel. You look for crossing. You look for fray. Everything looks serviceable, and that's a relief. Then you wind with a slow shoulder motion, lifting the weight with steady turns. The weight rises with a quiet, heavy obedience. You stop to let the line settle. You stop again to make sure it lays true. You've learned that patience here saves whole afternoons later. When you've wound it enough, you stop before it tightens hard. You remove the crank and set it down. Now comes the setting. You don't force hands. You don't spin them as if they're toys. A public clock has a motion work that can be bruised by carelessness. You reach to the setting square and make a small adjustment. You bring the minute hand back, slowly, until it matches the staff clock you saw inside. You pause at the top, because the top of the hour is where strikes and signals like to happen. You listen. This clock doesn't strike like the church. It doesn't have a bell up here, not in this little station. But it has its own click, its own internal moment when the minute hand passes the 12. You let it pass naturally. Then you set it to the correct minute. When you're done, you stand still. You watch for a full minute. You listen for a full minute. The tick here is steady. It has the sharper sound of a smaller pendulum, a different rhythm than the town hall's deeper pace. But it's even. It doesn't limp. That tells you something too. The town's problem might not be one clock. It might be the way clocks have begun to disagree, each one loyal to a different master. You go back down. You return the key. The station master asks, just with his eyes, if it's sorted. You tell him it's set to railway time now. You tell him you'll be watching it. He nods once, satisfied, and already his mind is back on goods wagons and morning arrivals. Outside, the sky has lightened. Not sunlight, just that thin grey that means the day is coming whether you're ready or not. You walk back across the square. The post office regulator sits in its window like a piece of furniture. Behind glass, it looks clean and calm. It's a different kind of authority, quieter than the railways. Inside, it's set by signal too, but the signal comes by wire in a different chain. Sometimes it agrees with the railway, sometimes it argues by a few seconds, and those seconds can grow into minutes if nobody is looking. You don't go in yet. Not yet. You keep moving, because your route has other dials that depend on you. The market hall is next. The market hall sits broad and solid, built to shelter voices and goods. At this hour, it's only beginning to wake. A man in an apron is lifting shutters. Someone is pushing a barrow that squeaks in one-wheel revolution like a small complaint. Above the main door, the market dial watches over the street. Its face is a little stained, as if the weather has been writing on it. You've serviced it long enough to know its habits. This one gets stubborn when it's cold. The hands are longer, and wind pushes them, and frost makes the grease thicken where it shouldn't. You go to the side entrance where the service ladder is kept. The caretaker here is different from the town hall man. This one is a bit proud of the building. He likes to say what's been painted, what's been repaired. He greets you with a quiet joke about you being earlier than the traders. You answer with a small smile, nothing loud. You ask for the key. He produces it from a hook inside his little room. The room smells of damp rope and old brooms. You climb. The ladder is cold under your hands. Your lantern swings gently, and the light moves across the brickwork in slow arcs. At the top you reach the small access door behind the dial. You open it, and dust breathes out. Market dust is different from coal dust. It's flour sometimes, dried vegetable leaves, bits of straw. It holds the day's work in small pieces. Inside, the mechanism is smaller than the town hall's, simpler in some ways, fussier in others. The winding arbor sits at a convenient height, and you wind it first because winding comes before blame. The weight rises, the line looks good, no crossing, no obvious fray. Then you check the hands. You compare, in your mind, to the railway time you've chosen as today's authority. This dial is behind, not by much, but enough to match the kind of small complaints you've been hearing. A clock behind makes people feel the day is slipping. It makes bakers change their oven times. It makes stall holders arrive annoyed. It makes the bell feel late. Shh. You don't reset it yet. You check something more mundane first. You look for clearance. You put your eye level with the back of the dial, and you watch the hands as they move. Sometimes in cold weather, the minute hand can sag the smallest amount. Sometimes a fastening screw loosens, and the hand droops closer to the dial face. Then, as it turns, it brushes. Not enough to stop, just enough to steal a little time. You take your thin screwdriver, you touch the set screw, and you test it with the gentlest pressure. It moves. Not much, but it moves, and that's likely your answer. You tighten it carefully. You don't overdo it. Metal remembers force. Then you ease the minute hand outward by a hair, just enough to make sure it won't kiss the dial on damp mornings. You turn the hand slowly through a quarter hour and watch. No brushing, no hesitation. Now you reset. You bring it forward to match the station time, but you do it in a way that respects the gears. You pause at the half hour. You pause again near the hour, because even this market dial has a small internal change there. When you're satisfied, you close the access door. You climb down and the market hall feels larger again once you're out of its hidden spaces. The caretaker asks casually if it was off. You tell him it was binding a little. You tell him it should behave better now. He nods, and that's enough for him. He has other things, keys and corridors and the first arguments of the day to manage. Outside, voices are rising, not angry, just awake. The market is arriving. You walk through the first rows of stalls as they set up. You smell apples and wet canvas. You hear a woman laughing at something small. And you hear, more than once, someone call out a time, as if saying it makes it true. 8:30, near 8. Plenty of time. People borrow the clock without thinking. They borrow it like they borrow a street lamp. They only notice when it fails them. You continue toward the church turret on the edge of town. The church sits where the ground rises. You can see the sea from there on, clear days. Today the air is thick with mist, and the horizon is a soft smear. The church clock has been there longer than any of the others. It used to be the town's main timekeeper. Back when markets and prayers were the timetable, now it shares the job with municipal dials and the railway. But it still matters. People glance at it on their way to work. They check it from the road, they listen for its hour strike, and they set their kitchen clocks by it without knowing they're doing it. You let yourself in through the side door. It smells of stone and old wood, and yesterday's candle smoke. Your steps are quieter here, not because someone told you to be, but because the building asks it. The turret access is a narrow door that always sticks a little. You shoulder it gently until it gives. Then you climb. The stairs up a church tower are never built for comfort. They're built for monks, for caretakers, for people who have time. Your lantern shows rough stone and old mortar. Your hand finds the rope lines for the bell, hanging like thick vines. Higher up, you reach the clock room. This one is colder than the town hall clock room. The walls are thinner, the wind finds cracks. The mechanism here is older, with heavier ironwork, and it smells of old grease and dust. You set your rag down as you always do, making a small island of order. You listen. The tick is deep, slower, like a man walking with long legs. It is steady, that's good. You check the pendulum beat by ear, the even spacing. You check the weights, and you wind. Here, winding is work, the crank is long, the weights are heavy. Your shoulder takes it, and your breath matches the turns. You pause, and the silence between turns is thick. When the weight is up, you stop. You check the hands by looking through the louvered opening toward the dial. This one is close enough to railway time. Not perfect, but acceptable. A church clock, drifting by a half-minute in a day, is not scandal. But today you are collecting evidence, not just keeping things moving. So you take out your pencil. You write in your small notebook. Town hall slow, uneven beat. Station fast, reset to railway. Market slow, minute handbinding corrected. Church steady. Those notes feel like pins in a map. They show you where the town's time is pulling. You stand in the church clock room for a moment longer. You listen again, because listening is the part you can't hurry. The beat is good here. That tells you the morning's trouble likely lives back at the town hall, or in the way you've been comparing time. You close your notebook, you go back down the stairs. When you step outside, the day is properly alive. The square will be busy now. The station will have its first train in. The market will be loud enough to blur into a single sound, and somewhere above, behind wood and glass and iron, the town hall clock is still ticking with that faint hitch. You start back toward it, not with worry, with a new carefulness, as if the town's seconds have become something you can feel in your pocket. On the way, you stop at the post office, not to send anything, to look. Inside, the air is warmer, and it smells of paper and glue and damp coats. The regulator clock sits behind its glass. It is plain serious, a long pendulum behind a clean face. People glance at it while they wait for stamps, and they don't notice they're doing it. You stand where you can see it clearly. You compare it in your mind to the station time you've chosen. There's a difference. Not big, but there. A few seconds, enough that in a day like this, it could become a story. You don't ask the clerk about it. The clerk has no power over it, and no desire to discuss seconds. You simply note it. Railway time is one chain, post office signal is another. And your work sits in between, trying to keep the public faces from arguing. Back at the town hall, the building feels different now. In the early morning it was asleep. Now it's awake, with footsteps in hallways, doors opening, voices muffled behind panels. The caretaker greets you with a look that says, "You're back sooner than usual." You tell him you need to give the clock more time today. He understands. Caretakers understand when something familiar needs attention. He hands you the key without commentary. You climb again. The stairwell is less lonely now. You can hear life below, faint, like water running through pipes. At the top landing, you open the clockroom door. The smell meets you first. Old oil dust, and the particular dry scent of wooden cases warmed slightly by lantern and daylight. You set your tools out more deliberately this time. You lay your rag flat. You set the oil bottle upright. You place the screwdriver where your fingers can find it without looking. Then you stand close to the case, and you listen again. The hitch is still there. It hasn't resolved with winding. That's important. It means the cause isn't just low power, it's something in the path, something that's stealing a little energy at the wrong moment. You open the back of the case carefully. The hinges complain softly. Inside, the mechanism is exposed. Wheels, pinions, levers, the escape wheel at the top, and the pallets that catch and release it. It's all there, doing its quiet work. You don't touch yet. You watch. You let the lantern light fall across the teeth. The escape wheel turns with a fine, steady certainty. And then, once each swing, it seems to hesitate in the smallest way. You bring the lantern closer, and you watch the teeth meet the pallets, one after another, like a careful handshake. The surfaces should look slightly damp with oil, not wet, not dry, just quietly tended. Here, the pallet faces have a dry shine to them, a polished look that comes from running too long without fresh oil. That kind of dryness doesn't shout, it just steals a little energy each time the tooth slides and locks. You let your eyes travel down the train from wheel to wheel, and you look for anything that seems out of place. A good mechanism looks like a calm argument that always ends the same way. This one looks mostly calm, but the lantern shows a faint dusting on the escape wheel. A soft grey grit that doesn't belong. It sits in the corners of the teeth, and on the rim, like flour on a bench. You don't touch it with your fingers. You've learned that skin oil makes its own kind of dirt, and it doesn't help. You take out a small, soft brush from your kit, the sort you keep wrapped in cloth so it stays clean. You hold it near the wheel without moving it yet. First you watch again because you want to know where the grit is catching. Then, in the moment when the wheel is locked and still, you brush gently along 2 teeth. The grit lifts easily and it falls onto your rag in a thin little line. You brush a few more, always waiting for the lock, always moving slow. It feels less like cleaning and more like listening with your hands. The tick begins to sound a touch less strained, even before you've done anything with oil. That's the thing about a public clock. It's always telling you what it needs, but only if you're willing to stay long enough to hear it. You brush around the pallets too, careful not to snag anything. The verge is not delicate like a watch, but it has its own sensitivity. A careless bump can change the relationship between tooth and pallet, and then you're chasing the problem you created. When you're satisfied the grit is mostly gone, you stop brushing and simply watch again. The escape wheel teeth look cleaner now, their edges more honest in the lantern light, but the pallet faces still look dry. You uncork your small oil bottle, and the smell is faint but familiar, clean and sharp compared to the old grease smell of the case. You don't pour. You never pour. You touch the oiler to the lip, and you take up a tiny drop, barely a bead, the size of a pinhead. You bring it to the pallet face, and you let it meet the metal with a light touch. The oil spreads by itself, not flooding, just wetting the surface where it matters. You do the same on the other pallet face, equally small, equally patient. Then you close the bottle again. Too much oil is worse than none in the long run. Too much turns into a sticky paste with dust, and then the clock works harder and harder until it complains. You watch the escapement work for a few minutes, letting the oil settle into its place. The tick changes. It doesn't get louder. It gets more even. The limp you heard becomes less of a limp, more of a steady walk again. You tilt your head and listen for the spacing between tick and tock. It's closer to even now, the 2 halves of the beat falling into a calmer balance. That gives you a quiet relief, not a triumph, just the feeling of a door closing properly in its frame. You move your lantern lower, and you look at the great wheel and the intermediate wheels, the ones that carry the weights pull upward to the escapement. You turn the great wheel by hand, very slightly, using the safe points where you can move it without fighting the train. You feel for roughness, you feel for a tooth that doesn't want to pass. The motion is smooth, mostly. It has the steady, oiled heaviness of a machine that's been doing the same work for years. You check the depthing, the way the teeth engage, by watching the mesh in different positions. It's not something you measure with numbers. It's something you judge with the eye and the ear. Too deep, and it binds. Too shallow, and it chatters. This one looks well set, which points you back again to the grit and dryness you've just eased. But you don't let yourself believe that's the whole story yet. A clock that has begun to drift can have more than one small cause. And small causes like to travel in pairs. You look at the pendulum crutch, the fork that embraces the pendulum rod and gives it its push. You watch the rod pass through it, left and right, always the same distance. The pendulum itself looks steady, not wobbling, not grazing anything. The suspension spring above is hard to see, but you can tell its health by the way the pendulum swings, clean and free. You listen again for beat. Better now. Not perfect, but better. You could adjust beat by shifting the crutch a hair, but you don't do it yet. You want to see what the clock does when it runs on its own for a while. First, you let it settle. That's the patient part of your trade. Not just fixing, but allowing. You step back, and you let the mechanism be itself. In the quiet, you can hear the building too. A distant door closes. A voice echoes once in a corridor and fades. Then you have the clock again. Tick, tock, tick, tock. More even now. You make a note in your ledger, not just what you did, but what you saw. Light grit on escape wheel, pallets dry, cleaned lightly, oiled sparingly. Tick, improved. You write it because in a month the memory will blur and the notes won't, and because the town's time deserves more than guesswork. Then your lantern light drops to the weight line, almost by accident, the way the eye sometimes finds a detail when the mind is resting. The line runs down from the barrel into the shaft, pale and strong, and it looks ordinary until you look closer. Near the drum, where the line bends and takes its load, the fibers have a slight fuzz to them, not a clean surface, a soft roughness. You lean in and you bring the lantern so close you can see individual strands. There's a fray beginning, not a break, not yet. Just a patch where the line has been worrying against something, or drying, or aging, the way rope does, even when nobody is watching it. It's the kind of thing you notice because you've stared at 100 lines in 100 towers. It's the kind of thing the town never sees. Your stomach doesn't drop. It doesn't need to. You simply feel the weight of the fact. A frayed line is a future problem. It's a quiet promise of trouble, if it's ignored. You reach out and touch the line very gently, not pulling, just feeling its surface. It feels a little rougher than the rest. You trace it with your fingers up to where it lays on the barrel. The barrel itself is smooth, but there's a place on the edge where an old burr might be hiding, or where the line has been riding slightly wrong. You can't fix a line by wishing. You fix it by replacing it, or by dressing the barrel, and that takes time, and usually another pair of hands. You make another note. Weight line slight fray near drum. Inspect barrel edge. Plan replacement soon. You look at the clock again, and you let that information sit beside the improved tick. Two truths at once. The escapement needed tenderness. The line needs planning. That's what your day has become. Not one problem, but a little chain of them, each small, each asking for steady attention. You close the case door, not latching it hard, just setting it back into place. The sound of the tick becomes muffled again, more private. You gather your rag and tools. You leave the oil bottle where it belongs in your pocket, upright. You take the ledger and you add the day's entry carefully, because if someone asks later, the book is your calm witness. Then you lock the clock room and you return the key to the caretaker downstairs. He asks if it was serious. You tell him it was dry in the escapement and you've seen to it. You don't mention the line yet, not because you're hiding it, because you want to look once more later, and because you don't raise concern until you have a clear plan. The caretaker nods. He trusts you to keep your own sense of urgency. You step back into the square. The day is properly underway now. People cross with baskets and parcels. A bicycle rattles over cobbles. The market sound is broader, like fabric being shaken out. And the clocks, all of them, are doing their quiet work above these heads. Most people never think about the work it takes to keep a public minute steady. They simply arrive when the hand tells them to. They feel late when it says so. They blame themselves, or the weather, or the shoes on their feet. But the truth is, they're borrowing time from machines and from the people who tend those machines. And today, you can feel how thin that borrowing can be. As you walk toward the market again, you pass a bakery with its door open to the street. Warm air spills out, smelling of yeast and smoke and the sweet edge of cooling crust. The baker stands in his apron, wiping his hands on a cloth that has seen 1,000 mornings. He knows you, not as a friend exactly, but as a figure in the town's machinery. He calls you over with a small lift of his chin. He speaks quietly, so it doesn't turn into a public complaint. He says he's been opening the ovens earlier. He says the market bell seems late some mornings, and the first rush passes before the first tray is ready. He isn't angry. He's just adjusting his life around a thing he thought was fixed. You listen. You nod. You don't defend the clocks. You don't make excuses. You simply take the information like a tool being handed to you. You tell him you're watching the sequence today. You tell him you'll compare the bell, the church strike, and the station departures. He seems satisfied with that, not because he understands the mechanism, because he understands routine, and he understands when someone is taking routine seriously. You leave him to his heat and flour. You step back into the cooler air of the street. You decide to do something you don't always have time for. You decide to observe, not from a desk, from the town itself. You walk to a place where you can hear the market bell clearly, and where you can see the market dial without craning your neck. You pick a spot near a post. Out of the way, you take out your pocket watch again, but now you don't treat it like the judge. You treat it like a notebook with hands. You've already chosen railway time as your authority, but you can't stand on the platform all day. So you use your watch as a relative measure, and you correct it mentally. Knowing it's a little off, you watch the market minute hand move. Slowly, steadily, no brushing now. That's good. You listen for the market bell. It rings on a schedule tied to the building's clock and to the caretaker's habit. It's not an automated strike like the church. It's a human action. A rope pulled, a bell answered. That makes it softer as an authority, but more immediate as a signal. People hear it and move. They take out coins, they unwrap goods. They begin the morning in earnest. A few minutes later, you hear the church clock strike the hour, its tone carrying across the rooftops. The strikes are spaced, not rushed. Each one falls into the next with a steady patience. You count without thinking, 1, 2, 3, and so on. When the last strike fades, you hear the market noise swell again, as if the hour is a small tide. Then, a little later, you hear the far sound of a train, and the station's own life shifts. This is the sequence, the town's public rhythm. Bell, strike, departure. Each one a different kind of time braided together. And when they disagree, the braid loosens. You walk closer to the market hall and go inside, letting the louder sound wrap around you. Stalls are set. Knives tap on boards. Weights and scales clink. A woman tears paper from a roll with a quick snap, then folds it with practiced hands. Time lives in these movements more than in any dial. But people still look up, still ask, still call out. You pass under the market clock again and you glance up. Now that you've eased the hand, it looks more honest. It looks like it wants to do its job again. You keep moving. You make a slow circuit, not to buy anything, just to hear what the town is saying with its small complaints. People mention being early, people mention being late. A man says his wife insists the kitchen clock is right and the station is wrong. Another says the station is the only thing to trust because trains don't wait for anyone. You listen and you don't correct them. You're not here to win an argument. You're here to keep the arguments from starting in the first place. By early afternoon, the daylight has turned pale and low, the kind that makes brass look softer and stone look flatter. Your route is mostly done for the day, but your mind is still up in the town hall case, on that frayed line. You know what you should do. You should arrange to replace it soon. Lines don't heal. They only wear. But you also know the town hall clock is the most visible face of time in the square. If it stops, people will notice. And if you disturb the line, if you move it, if you test it too hard, you might make it stop sooner than it would have. So you think, in the careful way your trade teaches you. You plan for a time when you can control the disturbance. You plan for another pair of hands. You plan for daylight, not lantern light, and for calm, not hurry. You return to the town hall in the late afternoon when offices begin to quiet. The corridors smell faintly of paper and ink and damp coats hung to dry. The caretaker is making his rounds, checking doors, turning off lights, collecting the building into itself. He looks up as you approach, and you can see he's already thinking of closing. You ask him, gently, about spare line. He raises his eyebrows, not in alarm, in recognition. He knows what that question means. He leads you to a small storage cupboard, and he opens it with a key that squeaks in the lock. Inside are the town hall's quiet backups, a coil of line, a tin of old polish, a few spare screws in a small box, a rag that's more grey than cloth now. He takes out the coil and sets it on a table. You run your hand over it. It feels strong. It smells like rope and storage, dry and honest. Not brand new, but sound. You ask if there's anyone who can lend a hand later if needed. He says he can. He says there's a man who cleans the steps and can lift a weight if asked. He says, when? You tell him, not yet. Not unless you see the fray worsening. Not unless tonight's final check shows you something you don't like. He accepts that. Caretakers live on conditional plans. They know the building makes its own requests. As dusk approaches, the town changes character. The market folds up, canvas comes down, stalls become bare wood again. Footsteps sound sharper on the square as the air cools. Windows begin to glow. A few lamps are lit, one by one, and the light seems to sit on the cobbles rather than spread. This is the time you always return to the town hall for a last look. Not because the clock needs you twice a day when it's healthy, because it's your habit to confirm, to listen, to make sure the evening strike will be clean. People forgive a clock that is a minute out. They do not forgive a clock that strikes wrong in the dark. A wrong strike feels like a broken promise. You take your lantern again. You climb the narrow stairwell, and the building feels like it's exhaling. Office is empty. Paperwork sleeps on desks. The echo in the stairwell is deeper now because fewer voices are filling the air below. At the top landing, you pause, listening through the door. The tick is steady, steadier than this morning. That's good, but you're listening for more than tick now. You're listening for strain. You open the door and step into the clock room, and the lantern light finds the case like an old friend. You set your tools down, though you hope you won't need them. You open the back of the case again. The mechanism glows softly in the dim light, brass and steel warmed by a day of movement. The escapement looks healthier. The pallet face is no longer bone dry. The escape wheel teeth look cleaner, but your eyes drift down again, as if pulled, to the line, to the place where the rope bends and holds the town's minutes up by force of gravity. The frayed patch is still there. It doesn't look worse, but now that you know it's there, it looks more real. You decide to test the winding gently, just enough to see how the line lays on the barrel. You don't want to lift the weight much. You just want to see if the line wants to ride to one side. You fit the key to the winding arbor. You take a steady stance, feet planted. You turn slowly. The barrel rotates. The line shifts. For a moment it lays neatly, then it drifts a hair toward the edge. Not far, just enough to touch that place you suspected. The edge that may have a burr. The edge that may have been slowly worrying the fibers day after day. You stop turning. You look closely. The line sits under tension, quiet and heavy. You can see the tiny fibers lifted where they've been rubbed. You could dress the barrel edge with a file, but not while the line is loaded. You could relay the line, guiding it by hand, but that means putting your fingers near a moving barrel and a loaded rope. It's not dangerous if you're careful, but it's not something you do lightly. You consider your options the way you always do, in simple terms. Leave it and risk it. Touch it and risk it. The trade is often like that. The right choice is the one with the steadier hand. You decide to do the smallest safe thing first. You take a wooden wedge from your kit, a playing piece you use for holding doors and spacing parts. You position it so you can guide the line very slightly as you turn. Keeping your fingers away, you turn the key again slowly. The line rises and lays, and with the wedge you nudge it inward, away from the edge. It responds. It lays flatter. You stop. You let go. You watch it. For a moment it stays. Then, with the weight's pull, it begins to creep back again toward that same side. You can see the rope wanting to find its old path, the one it has learned by repetition. That small sideways creep tells you there's a shape to the barrel's winding, a habit worn into wood or metal. It's not a thought you enjoy, but it's a thought you trust. A line that won't stay centered is a line that's being asked to scrape, minute after minute, hour after hour. And scraping turns into fraying even when everything else is running sweetly. You take your hand off the key and just listen again, letting the tick speak for the whole mechanism. The beat is still even enough to calm you, but the faint whisper of rope on edge, barely audible, feels like a different kind of sound. It's the sound of a future problem making itself comfortable. You bring the lantern lower, so the light sits on the barrel and the first wrap of line. You look for the reason the line is walking. Sometimes it's as simple as the first turn being laid slightly wrong weeks ago, then each new turn obediently following it. Sometimes it's a flange, a small rim meant to guide the line, worn down on one side. Sometimes it's the barrel arbor not quite square, a fraction out, enough to make the line drift as it winds. You can't measure that fraction with a ruler in a lantern-lit room. You measure it with patience. You turn the key a half turn, then stop. Watching the line settle, you turn another half turn, then stop again. The line keeps seeking the same side, like water finding a familiar groove. You could fight it all night with a wedge. But that's not a repair. That's you holding back a tide with a thumb. So you make the next decision quietly, the way you make most decisions in this work. You'll stop winding for tonight. Not because the clock is low, because every extra lift asks the rope to rub again. And you'd rather have slightly less height on the weight than one more pass across a burr. You remove the key and set it down. The clock keeps going. It doesn't care about your worry. It only cares that the escapement gets its regular push and that gravity keeps pulling. You look along the line's path into the weight shaft, but the darkness down there is thick. You can see only the first stretch clearly. The rest is a vertical tunnel of stone and timber, where the weight travels like a slow elevator no one rides. In a well-lit workshop, you might rig a mirror, or drop a plumb, or mark the line with chalk. Here, you do what clock winders have always done. You rely on what you can see, what you can hear, and what you know from 100 other mornings. You put your fingertips on the frayed patch again, gently, as if it might flinch. The fibers are raised, and there's a dryness to them. Not snapping dry, but tired dry, like cord that's been warmed and cooled too many times. You think about salt air. You think about damp coming in through stone, and you think about how rope ages even when it looks fine from the square. The building below is quieter now. The office is nearly done for the day. Soon the caretaker will lock the main doors. Soon the square will belong to footsteps heading home and to the soft gossip of lamps. And when the hour comes, people will listen for the town hall strike the way they always do. They'll listen without meaning to. They'll be washing hands or setting pans or closing shop shutters. And the sound will either arrive or it won't. You glance at the strike train, the side of the movement that does the sounding. It's its own little world of wheels and levers, built to wake a hammer at the right moment. It looks fine, but you know how quickly fine can change if the going train takes a jolt. You close the case door again, not shutting the problem away, just putting the mechanism back into its usual privacy. Then you pick up your ledger and write one more line slower than the others. Line creeping to edge on wind, likely burr or barrel lay. Avoid extra winding tonight, plan reline and dress barrel. Your pencil makes a faint scratch, and the scratch feels like a promise to your future self. You put the ledger away. You gather your tools, and you step out, locking the clock room behind you. The stairwell carries the scent of cold stone again, and you take the steps down carefully, thinking about how to tell a caretaker that time may need to pause. At the caretaker's desk, you find him checking a list by lamplight. He looks up as you approach, reading your face the way he reads loose hinges and drafty windows. You tell him the truth, but you tell it gently. You say the clock is running better since the cleaning. You say the beat is steadier. Then you say the weight line is more serious than you'd like. You explain that it's fraying where it rides the barrel edge. And you explain that the line is walking to one side when you wind. He doesn't interrupt. He just nods slowly, because he's heard similar things about doors and drains. But he also understands that this problem has a face in the square. You tell him you'd like help tonight, not to rush, but to be ready. You ask him to send word to the man who cleans steps, the one with steady arms, and you ask him to bring the spare coil of line to the clock room. He asks, will it stop tonight? You say you don't know, but you won't pretend it can't. A frayed line can hold for weeks, and it can also fail at an ordinary moment without drama, just a tired surrender. He stands up at once because caretakers move when there's something practical to do. He goes off to fetch and to speak quietly in corridors. And you, with nothing to do but wait, find yourself listening for the next strike as if it's a test. Time passes in the town hall differently than it does outside. Outside, people move and talk and carry things. Inside, the building has its own patient rhythm, doors closing, footsteps fading, keys turning. You sit on a wooden chair near the caretaker's desk. Your hands rest on your knees, and they smell faintly of oil and rope. A clock winder's hands carry a whole town's hidden materials: brass, iron, hemp, dust, and the clean sharpness of proper oil. You can hear the town hall clock only faintly from here, a distant tick tucked into stone, but you can feel it in your thoughts, like a metronome you can't switch off. After a little while, the man arrives, the one who cleans steps. He takes his cap off in the office, polite without trying. He looks like someone who knows how to lift without showing off. The caretaker tells him what's needed. Not a speech, just a few plain words about a rope and a weight and needing steady hands. The man nods. He doesn't ask why. That's the kind of person you want in a clock room. Chaussette. The caretaker brings the coil of spare line, heavy in his arms. He sets it on the desk as if it's a sleeping animal. You stand and run your hand over it again. It feels coarse and honest. It smells like storage and like the faint sweetness of dried hemp. You tell them both you'll go up now while there's still some light left in the sky. It's easier to do delicate work when you're not racing the night. And even though you have lanterns, you'd rather the world outside be awake while you ask a public clock to stop. The three of you climb. In the stairwell, footsteps sound heavier with company. The lantern light bobs across the walls. The coil of rope bumps gently against the caretaker's leg as he carries it. No one talks much. There's nothing to say that helps. The work itself will be the conversation. At the top landing, you unlock the clock room. You open the door, and the tick is clear again, a steady presence in the small space. You set your tools down. You ask the step cleaner to set the spare line on the rag, away from dust. You ask the caretaker to hold the lantern so the light falls where you need it. They do as asked, quietly, and you feel a small gratitude for the way people can cooperate without fuss when the task is plain. You open the case. The mechanism is there, still doing its work as if nothing has changed. The weight line still sits slightly to one side on the barrel, and now, with extra eyes in the room, you feel the need to be even slower. Not because you're uncertain, because you're responsible. Replacing a weight line isn't like tightening a set screw. It's a bigger action. It means taking the load off the rope. It means securing the weight so it can't drop. It means stopping the clock, because you don't work on a running line. And once you stop a public clock, you've created a silence the town can hear. You explain this simply to the two men. You tell them you'll stop the clock first, then secure the weight. You tell them you'll need one man to hold tension and one to keep the lantern steady and pass tools. They nod again. No jokes, no bravado, just readiness. You reach for the pendulum. Stopping a clock starts here, with the long, calm swing that keeps it alive. You don't grab it. You touch the pendulum bob lightly, letting your fingers meet its motion. You apply a gentle resistance. The swing shortens. The tick slows. Tick, tock. Then, after another breath, it stops. The silence that follows is immediate and strange, as if the room has lost its heartbeat. You feel the change in your body. Even if you don't show it, you've grown used to that sound being present. Without it, the room feels larger. You tell the step cleaner to stand. I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request. Near the open weight shaft, with both feet planted and his hands ready to take a steady strain. You ask him to look down and to tell you where the weight is sitting and how much space it has left to drop. He leans in, careful with his balance, and says it's hanging clean. with a good stretch of shaft below it. That's useful because it means you have room to work without rushing the last few inches of travel. You tell, "I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request," him to keep his hands away from the line itself and to be ready for the weight, not the rope. You tell him the rope can bite and twist, but the weight is honest, straight down, and slow. He nods once and shifts his stance, as if settling into a long lift. You ask the caretaker to bring the lantern closer to the barrel, so you can see the first wrap clearly. The lantern light pools on the drum, and the rope's fibers show up like fine hair. You point to the edge where the line keeps walking, and you show them the faint roughness there. It looks like nothing, unless you've learned to read nothing. You take a length of soft cord from your kit, and you loop it around the weight line just above the barrel. It's a temporary tie, not meant to carry the load, only meant to keep the line from unlaying suddenly. You cinch it gently, and you tuck the end out of the way. Then you set a wooden block under the line's path, a simple chock, to keep it from rubbing as you work. Now you need to take the pull off the barrel, without letting the weight drop. On some clocks, there's a ratchet you can hold with a click spring and a pin. On this one, you do it the old way, with friction, wedges, and another man's steady arms. You ask the step cleaner to reach down into the shaft opening, not far, just far enough to find the weight's guiding rail. He braces his forearms against the edge of the opening, and you can see his shoulders set. You tell him you're going to let the barrel pay out a small amount of line. You tell him to take the weight's movement with his arms and body, letting it settle, not drop. You fit the winding key back onto the arbor, but you don't wind. You hold it firmly, and you lift the click slightly, just enough to let the ratchet move under control. The first tiny shift makes a sound like dry leather, a soft scrape. The key pulls against your hand, and the weight answers with a slow downward desire. You let it move a finger's width, then you stop. The step cleaner exhales through his nose, and you can hear the controlled effort in that small breath. You ask him, quietly, if it moved clean. He says yes, steady. That's what you need, a steady yes. You repeat it, letting out line in small portions, each one a measured surrender. The rope slides on the barrel, and you watch it the way you'd watch a match near paper. You don't want heat, you don't want speed, you don't want surprise. After a few controlled pays, the weight is sitting lower and the barrel has less pull on it. Not free, but gentler. Now you can secure the weight properly. You take another rope, thicker, a short length kept in the town hall stores for odd lifting jobs. You loop it around a stout beam near the shaft opening, and you tie it with a knot that doesn't slip when it's frightened. You lower the free end down toward the weight, and the step cleaner guides it, his hands moving carefully in the dim. He wraps it around the weight's hook assembly, not interfering with the working line, just creating a second, independent hold. You pull the safety rope tight, and you take up the slack until you can feel the weight's pull shared between systems. This is the feeling you want, the load distributed, the risk reduced. The caretaker holds the lantern steady, his wrist making small corrections as you move. In this light, his face looks more tired than it did downstairs. Buildings tire people, even when they're quiet. You test the safety rope gently, a small tug, then another. The weight doesn't move, the working line slackens the slightest bit, and that small slack is permission. Now you can unship the old line from the barrel without it snapping into motion. You take your thin screwdriver and loosen the line's fastening at the barrel. Some drums use a clamp, some use a wedge, and this one uses a simple anchor bolt. You turn it slowly, feeling the thread give. The end of the rope comes free, and you hold it in your palm. It feels rough and warmer than you expect, warm from friction and hours of labor. You don't pull the whole rope out at once. You unwind it by hand, letting each wrap lift and fall away from the drum. The fibers squeak faintly as they separate from the groove they've lived in. The line comes up in loops, and you coil it on the floor, making it neat even though it's failing. There's a respect in neatness, even for the things you're discarding. When you reach the frayed section, you stop and show it to them. The damage is clearer now, not a suggestion anymore. Several outer strands are worn thin and one is broken, ending in a small tuft. The caretaker sucks in a small breath. Not panic, just recognition. He's thinking of the square, and the silence a stopped clock brings. You set the old rope aside and you turn your attention to the barrel edge. This is where the job becomes more than replacing rope. If you don't address the reason the rope walked, the new line will learn the same bad habit. You take a small file, fine cut, and you pass it gently over the edge where you saw the line creeping. You do it with light strokes, listening to the metal's quiet rasp. A few filings fall onto your rag like dark sand. You run your fingertip over the edge. Afterward, slowly. It feels smoother now. Not perfect, but no longer sharp. Then you take a bit of emery cloth and polish in a small circle, removing the last hint of burr. You wipe the barrel clean with your rag, so grit doesn't become the next problem. The lantern makes the cleaned edge shine in a plain working way. Not pretty, just safe. Now, the new line. You uncoil the spare rope on the floor, and it makes a soft, dry whisper as it opens. You check its thickness with your fingers, and you look along it for any weak spots. You smell it, because rope tells you its age by smell. This one smells clean enough, storage dry. No rot. You choose the end that looks most sound, and you prepare it for fastening. You bind the rope's end with a tight wrap of twine, making a neat collar that keeps strands together. Then you taper it slightly with your knife, shaving only loose fibers, not cutting into strength. You feed the end into the barrel's anchor point, and you set it under the clamp. You tighten the bolt slowly, feeling it bite into rope without crushing it. It's a balance, like so much in this work. Hold without harm. Before you wind anything, you lay the first wrap by hand. The first wrap is the one that teaches all the others where to sit. You place it just in from the edge, not too close, not too far. You guide it into the groove and you press it with your thumb, feeling the rope settle. The caretaker shifts the lantern so you can see the rope's path as it curves away. The step cleaner watches without speaking, his hands resting now, ready for the next demand. Shh. You wind the barrel a few turns, slowly, laying each new wrap beside the last. You stop often, checking alignment, checking that it doesn't climb toward the dressed edge. The rope behaves better already. It sits where you place it, like it's relieved to have guidance. When you have several wraps neat on the drum, you pause and look down into the shaft. Now the new line needs to meet the weight. You feed the free end down carefully, hand over hand, letting it slide through your palm. The rope is slightly rough, and it warms your skin as it moves. The step cleaner reaches down and takes the end when it comes within reach. He threads it through the weight's hook assembly, following your instructions in short, plain phrases. No fancy knots, just a secure termination, a loop with a thimble, and a seize that won't creep. He works with the quiet competence of a man who's tied things his whole life. When the new line is attached, you still don't trust it yet. Trust comes after test. You take up a little slack at the barrel with a slow wind, just enough to put gentle tension into the new rope. The weight lifts a fraction, and the safety rope takes some of the load, then yields as the new line claims its share. You listen for any scrape, nothing sharp, only the soft, controlled creak of rope settling under work. You ask the step cleaner to keep one hand on the safety rope, not pulling, just feeling. You wind a little more, and you watch the barrel. The line lays true. It doesn't creep toward the edge. It stays in the center band you've given it. This is the moment your shoulders loosen, just slightly. Not relief yet, just the first sign the repair will hold. Now you can begin to remove the safety rope, slowly giving the new line full responsibility. You take up the load with the barrel, a few turns at a time, until the safety rope slackens. The step cleaner feels that slack and tells you, softly, it's loose. He unwraps it from the hook assembly and pulls it up. You coil it and set it aside. One system again, but now a sounder one. The clock is still stopped. No tick. That silence remains, and it's time to address it. But restarting is not just swinging the pendulum and walking away. A weight line change can shift things, and the earlier jolt you avoided might still be waiting in the geometry of the beat. You need to bring it back gently and at the right moment so the town doesn't get a double strike or a confused hour. First, you wind the new line enough to give proper power. Not to the top, not yet, just enough that the train will run without strain. The key turns with that steady resistance again, and it feels clean now. No sideways drift, no rope whisper on edge. You stop and check the wraps. Even spacing. Good lay. Then you look at the escapement. You move the great wheel a hair and watch the escape wheel respond. Everything looks calm. Now you need a reference moment. A public clock, once stopped, has to rejoin the town like a person stepping into a moving line. You can't shove your way in. You wait for a clean opening. You ask the caretaker what time it is by his watch. He tells you, and you know his watch is set by habit, not by signal, but it gives you a sense. You ask if the station is due to sound its time signal soon, the small ritual they keep inside. He says the station master can be reached by telephone from downstairs. The town hall has a telephone now, not in every room, but in the main office. It's one of those new cords of authority, like the railway lines, like the post office wires. The caretaker offers to go down and call for the exact minute, then come back up. You consider the climb, the delay, the chance of missing the moment, then you decide. You tell him to go and to ask for the next clean mark, the top of the quarter hour. You can work with quarters. They're forgiving. He leaves, lantern still in the room, because you can't be left in darkness. The step cleaner stays with you, silent, hands resting on his thighs, as if listening for a sound that isn't there. You stand by the open case and look at the stopped pendulum. A pendulum at rest looks oddly vulnerable, like a bird with its wings folded. You check the crutch alignment again, because earlier you suspected the beat was slightly off. You remember the hitch. You remember how it sounded like a stiff step. You decide to set the beat properly before you restart, not by guessing, but by ear. You shift the crutch a fraction, a small adjustment that changes where the pendulum's push lands. It's a delicate action, and you do it with the same care you'd use to straighten a collar. Not forceful, just precise. Then you give the pendulum a gentle swing, just enough to hear the tick and tock begin. Tick, tock. Already you're listening for symmetry. Is the space equal? Does it sound like walking on level ground? For a moment it sounds good, then it begins to pull slightly to one side, as if wanting to hurry. This is the anomaly you expected. The earlier strain, the handling of the train, the stop and restart, it can all reveal what was hidden when the clock was simply running. You stop the pendulum again with your fingertips, and you adjust the crutch once more, even smaller. Then you start it again and listen. Tick, tock, tick, tock. This time the spacing feels steadier. The step cleaner, who doesn't know clocks the way you do, still hears the difference. He doesn't say it, but his shoulders ease. You let the clock run for a few minutes, just listening, not watching hands yet. Hands can lie for a while, coasting on gearing, but the beat tells the truth immediately. The beat holds. It doesn't race. It doesn't limp. It just goes on, patient and even. Then you stop it again, because you are still waiting for the reference moment and you don't want it wandering ahead. While you wait, you take a moment to explain something to the step cleaner quietly, because he's here and he's helping. You tell him these weight-driven clocks are simple in principle. A weight falls, wheels turn. The escapement sips that power, one tooth at a time, so it lasts all day. And the pendulum, swinging like a calm judge, decides the pace. You tell him that winding isn't just lifting a weight. It's agreeing to carry the town's rhythm with your own arms. He nods, as if that makes sense in his body. He knows what it is to do the same motion every day and have people never notice. The caretaker returns, a little out of breath from the stairs. He holds a small slip of paper in his fingers because he's the sort who writes things down when they matter. He tells you the station master gave him the next clean mark, the top of the next quarter hour, and the minute it will land on. He says it plainly, and then he repeats it once, to be sure it sticks. You nod and you feel your mind settle around a single point in time, like a compass finding north. You ask him how long. He looks at his watch, then back to you, and says a few minutes. That gives you just enough room to do the last gentle things. You step closer to the movement again, and you look at the strike work, not because you plan to touch it, but because you want to understand what it might do when the hands move. A public striking clock is two machines sharing one face. The going train keeps the hands moving, the strike train keeps the town informed by sound. When you stop one, the other waits, and sometimes it waits with a kind of stubborn memory. You check that the warning lever and the locking plate sit where they should, at rest, not half lifted. Everything looks calm. The step cleaner shifts his weight from one foot to the other, quietly, the way people do when they're trying to help by being ready. You tell him you'll start the pendulum right on the mark, and then you'll bring the hands up to match. Slowly, he nods again, watching your hands more than the clock, as if your hands are the real instrument. You take your own watch out again, not to argue with the railway, only to count down the approach. You hold it close to the lantern, and you watch its second hand work its way around with a thin, steady sweep. The clock in the case is still silent, pendulum at rest, waiting like a held breath. The caretaker stands to your left, lantern held up, his arm beginning to tire, but he doesn't lower it. You can see the small tremor in his wrist, and you're grateful for his effort. You tell him he can brace his elbow against the case. He does, and the light steadies. Now the only moving thing in the room is your watch hand. When the moment gets close, you stop looking at the movement and start listening for the building. A town hall has its own tiny noises. A pipe clicks as it cools. A door settles deeper into its frame. Far below, someone's footsteps cross a corridor, then fade. Those noises make the coming silence feel even more deliberate. You bring your fingers to the pendulum bob again. You don't push yet. You hold it just enough to feel its weight, cold and smooth under your fingertips. The top of the quarter hour arrives like a soft bell you can't hear. You see it on your watch, and you say, now, very quietly, not for drama, just to coordinate. You let the bob go, and you give it the gentlest start. A small encouragement. The pendulum swings. The escapement answers, tick, tock. The sound fills the room immediately, the way water fills an empty cup. You lean your head slightly, listening for that even spacing you worked for. It holds. Tick, tock. The step cleaner's eyes lift a little, as if the sound itself is a sign something is back in its place. Now you move to the hands, because the hands have been frozen in an earlier part of the evening. You check the dial position through the case window, and you see the minute hand sitting behind where it should be, a gap that feels larger now because you've earned it with work. You don't spin the hand. You advance it with care, using the proper setting square, moving it forward in small steps. You pause as you near the half hour, letting the motion work settle, letting any slack take up without a jerk. The going train keeps ticking as you do this, and you're careful not to make it fight. A clock can be made to fight itself if you're impatient, and impatience is expensive. As the hand comes closer to the correct minute, you listen again for the strike train's warning. On many turret clocks, when the minute hand nears the hour, the strike side lifts into readiness. There's a small change in sound, a soft lift, a faint gathering of tension. You hear it, and you stop advancing for a moment, letting the mechanism do its internal preparations on its own schedule. This is how you prevent a confused hour. You let the minute hand creep forward again, a little, then pause again. The caretaker's lantern light makes the brass edges glow, and you can see the tiniest movement of levers as the clock anticipates its own duty. You bring the minute hand to the correct mark, matching the station's quarter-hour alignment you just used to start the beat. Now the clock is alive and correctly placed, but it has still missed a portion of the evening. You can't erase that. A stopped clock always leaves a small blank in the town's memory, even if most people never notice the exact minute. What you can do is make sure it doesn't stumble again. So you stand and listen, letting the clock run without your hands on it. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The sound is steadier than it was this morning. The limp is gone. The rope lays clean on the barrel, and that is about as much peace as a clockroom ever offers. You close the case door gently, and the tick turns softer, a private sound again. The caretaker lowers the lantern a little and rolls his shoulder, because holding light is also work. You thank them both, in the plain way you do, without turning it into a speech. The step cleaner puts his cap back on, and you can tell he's pleased to have been useful in a job most people will never know happened. You ask him to leave the old rope coiled neatly by the wall. Tomorrow you'll take it away, or the caretaker will, and it won't be spoken of again. The three of you go back down the stairs. With each step, the tick fades behind the door, but you can still feel it, as if it's marking time in your chest. Downstairs, the caretaker locks the clockroom key back onto its hook, a small ritual returning the building to normal. He asks if it will strike tonight. You tell him it will, if all stays as it is now. You tell him you'll come early in the morning to confirm. He nods, satisfied with that. Caretakers like confirmations. Outside, the square has fully taken on its evening shape. Shop fronts are dim. A few windows glow in rectangles of yellow light. The damp on the cobbles holds reflections in a soft blur. You pause near the center of the square, not looking up at the dial yet, just listening for the town's sounds. A cartwheel bumps over a stone, someone laughs briefly, then the laugh disappears into a doorway. A dog shakes itself somewhere out of sight, and under all of that, there is the quiet sense of time moving again, steady, shared, unannounced. When the next hour comes, you listen for the town hall bell. You don't have to stare at your watch. You can tell by the way the evening air changes, by the way people slow near corners, by the way a town expects sound. Then, from above, the first strike arrives. It's clean. It lands in the square like a familiar weight. One, then the next. Two. They're evenly spaced, not hurried, not dragging. You let yourself breathe out. Not a sigh of triumph, just the release of a held attention. The sound carries into side streets, into kitchens, into rooms where people will never know you were up in the clockroom with rope burn on your palms. That's fine. That's how this job is meant to be. You walk home slowly. Your tools feel heavier now, not because they've gained weight, but because the day has been long and careful. In your pocket, your pencil stub rests beside the oil bottle. Your hands still, I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request. Carry the faint roughness of hemp and the cool slickness of oil, as if you've handled two worlds at once. You stop once at your own door, not because you're unsure, just because you're listening inwardly for the sound you left behind. There's no way to hear the town hall from here, but your mind supplies the rhythm anyway, steady as breathing. Inside your small room, you set the tools down in their usual place. Key beside rag, bottle upright, pencil where you won't break it. You don't eat much, just a plain supper, because attention has a way of taking up hunger. And when you finally lie back, you find that sleep doesn't come like a switch. It comes like a dial settling, a small hesitation, then a smooth turn. Before you drift fully, you think of the ledger. Tomorrow you'll need to write the line change properly, with the hour, with the reason, with the new rope's source. Not because anyone demands it today, but because records are how trades survive the years. And you know, in a quiet way, that the years are changing what it means to keep time. Morning arrives without drama, just a pale light under the curtain and the familiar chill in the room. You dress in the same order, shirt, waistcoat, coat, and you reach for your pocket watch out of habit. You still don't quite trust it, but you wind it anyway a few turns, feeling the tiny spring take the day's tension. Then you pick up your tools and step back into the street. The square is quiet again, the way it was yesterday before dawn, as if the town has returned to the starting mark. Your first stop is the station, not to fix anything, just to anchor your sense of the minute. The platform smells of coal and damp boards, and the big clock face looks calm in the early light. You stand where you can see it clearly, and you wait for the second hand you can't see, letting your own breathing pace the moment. You compare the station clock to your watch, and you note the difference again. Your watch is still a little stubborn, still not a perfect referee. But today, you don't mind. Today, you have a better chain of trust, because you've already made the town hall worthy of attention again. From the station, you walk past the market hall, not climbing yet, just glancing up at the dial. The minute hand moves with a clean steadiness, and you don't see the tiny sag you corrected. A small win, the kind that doesn't need a witness. At the church on the rise, you pause long enough to hear the deeper tick through stone, and it still sounds even. Then you turn back to the town hall, because that is where yesterday's work must prove itself. The caretaker is there when you arrive, and he looks at you with the quiet question of a man who listened for the strike in his own kitchen. You tell him you heard it too, clean and properly spaced. He nods, and the nod carries more relief than he'd ever say aloud. He hands you the key, and you climb the stairwell again. Stone underfoot, handrail cool. Lantern unlit this time because morning light is enough. At the clockroom door you pause, and you listen through the wood. The tick is there. It's steady, and the steadiness is different from yesterday. Not louder, just less tense. Inside, the case sits exactly as you left it, and the air smells the same. Old varnish, old oil, and a faint clean note from the fresh work. You open the back, and you look straight to the barrel. The new line is laying where you taught it to lay. A neat band of rope, no sideways wandering. You watch it for a full minute, letting the drum's slow changes show themselves. No creep, no whisper against an edge. That's the first piece of evidence you needed. You move your eyes up to the escapement. The pallets carry a modest shine now, not dry, not wet, just properly tended. The escape wheel teeth look clean, and the tick you hear matches what you see, evenly spaced, like footsteps down a straight corridor. You take out your pencil and make the morning's note. New weight line seated, barrel edge dressed, beat checked, running steady at inspection. Writing it down feels like placing a tool back on its hook. Downstairs again, you return the key, and the caretaker offers you tea, the way people do when a shared worry has passed through the building. You accept because tea is part of the maintenance too, not of clocks, but of the people around them. You sit at his desk, cup warming your hands, and you listen to the small life of the town hall beginning its day. A door opens, papers shuffle, a voice asks for a form, and under it all the clock keeps its private beat above, not asking for praise. It's while you're drinking that the caretaker mentions something he heard at the council office. Not gossip exactly, more like a plan spoken in the hallway. He says there's talk of bringing in an electric system for the municipal buildings. He says a master clock, wires, smaller dials that don't need weights and ropes, and a promise of no more winding. He says it carefully, watching your face as if he's afraid it might insult you. You don't take it as an insult. You've seen new things arrive before, in small ways. Telephones replacing messengers, gas lamps replacing oil, printed timetables making people expect exact minutes. An electric clock feels like the next logical step, not a betrayal. But you also know what gets lost when a job becomes invisible. Not the labor. The labor will always be somewhere. The attention gets lost, the human habit of listening for the first sign of trouble. So you decide, quietly, to write a proper report. Not a complaint, not a plea, just a calm account of what happened and what prevented it becoming worse. You tell the caretaker you'll bring the paper in the afternoon, addressed to the clerk. You tell him it will include the grit in the escapement, the dry pallets, the frayed line, and the barrel edge that caused the rope to walk. And you tell him, most simply, that regular inspection is cheaper than sudden silence. He nods, because caretakers understand preventive work better than most men in offices. You leave the town hall and make the rest of your round again, not to change anything, but to confirm stability, the way you'd press a latch twice before walking away. At the station, the big clock holds its setting, and the station master, busy with parcels, gives you a brief nod. That means no complaints today. At the market, you look up and see the dial keeping honest time, and you pass under it without needing the ladder. At the church, you listen for the hour strike, and it arrives when it should, steady as ever. The town's braid of time feels tighter again. By midday, you're back at your own table with a sheet of paper, your ledger open beside it. You write slowly, because careful writing is another kind of careful winding. You describe the uneven beat first, and how cleaning and proper oil restored the escapement's even action. Then you describe the rope, the fraying at the barrel, and the way the line walked toward an edge and began to worry itself. You explain how you dressed the burr, replaced the line, and relayed the first wraps so the rope would sit true. You include the plain truth that you stopped the clock to do it safely, and that the town hall strike was silent for a time because the alternative was worse. You don't use grand words, you use practical ones. You write that the clock is now running steadily, and that further trouble is unlikely if the movement is cleaned on schedule, and the lines inspected before they show wear. Then, with a steadier hand, you add a final paragraph about the proposed electric system. You say that electric clocks can keep good time when installed and maintained properly. You also say gently that electric systems still need inspection, contacts cleaned, wires checked, and a human ear to notice what a budget cannot hear. It's not an argument against change. It's a reminder that timekeeping is always a relationship between machines and people. In the afternoon, you deliver the report to the town hall clerk. The clerk reads the first lines with a polite frown, not because he dislikes you, but because mechanical details feel like a foreign language to him. You point to the simplest parts: frayed line replaced, clock stopped briefly, now stable. He nods, takes the paper, and places it in a tray with other papers that will become decisions weeks from now. That's how towns work, slowly, in stacks. As you step back into the square, you glance up at the town hall dial. The hands sit where they should, and the second hand, if there is one, moves with its quiet insistence. People cross beneath it without looking up. A woman adjusts her scarf. A man shifts a crate on his shoulder. A child tugs at a sleeve. And none of them know you replaced a rope so their afternoon would still have a shared shape. Late in the day, you return one last time to the town hall stairs, not because there's a new problem, but because your body has learned the comfort of checking. Up in the clock room, you listen for the beat again. It holds. You run your fingertips over the new line where it wraps the drum, and it feels firm, with no raised fibers. The dressed barrel edge feels smooth, and the mechanism, cleaned and oiled, seems to breathe more easily, as if it's grateful for attention it never asked for. You close the case and stand still for a moment in the little room. This is the part of the job no one writes about. Not winding, not repairing, just standing and listening, letting a machine prove its steadiness by doing nothing surprising. It's a quiet kind of faith, built out of repetition. And as you listen, you find yourself thinking about the men before you, who did the same in darker towers, with poorer oil, with rougher rope, with no one to call for the exact quarter hour. They listened anyway. You lock the clock room and take the key down to the caretaker for the last time today. He hooks it back where it belongs, and the hook's small click feels like the end of a sentence. He asks, almost casually, whether you think the electric system will really happen. You tell him you don't know. You tell him towns like promises that sound like savings, and they like the idea of no more climbing stairs. But you also tell him that when wires fail, they fail quietly too, and someone still has to notice. He accepts that, because caretakers have never believed in maintenance-free anything. On your way out, you pause by the base of the stairs and look back once, not at the offices, but at the closed door above where the tick lives. A door can hide a great deal. It can hide brass and iron and a rope thick as your thumb. It can hide the careful way a pendulum decides the pace of a whole building. And it can hide the truth that a town's confidence often rests on small things like a smooth barrel edge and a drop of clean oil. The evening comes again, softer than the last, because you are not braced for failure now. You walk through the square as lamps begin to glow, and you hear the town's usual